The elderly nun had lived in the convent for many years, long enough that people inside and outside the community saw her as part of its walls, part of its gentle silence. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and rarely drew attention. Every morning she woke before the sun, lit a small candle in the chapel, and whispered a short prayer for strength, not for herself, but for those she believed needed it more. To many people, she was simply the quiet woman who swept hallways and arranged flowers near the altar. No, one imagined she carried a story inside her, a story filled with melodies, long-forgotten dreams, and a talent that time had not taken away. Her days were simple. After morning prayers, she helped in the kitchen, peeling vegetables or stirring warm pots of soup. She enjoyed these little tasks because they made her feel useful, and the other sisters often thanked her with warm smiles. During the afternoons, she walked around the garden behind the convent. She loved the sound of dry leaves under her shoes and the soft wind that brushed through the trees. She always paused near the old wooden bench in the center of the garden. It was where she used to sit years ago when she first arrived, humming soft tunes only she could hear. There was a piano in the convent hall, a dark, polished instrument that many visitors admired but rarely played. It had belonged to a former member of the convent who had passed away long ago. For most of the younger sisters, the piano was more decoration than instrument. They touched its keys gently sometimes, smiling at the sound, but none of them knew how to truly bring it to life. The elderly nun, however, knew every part of it. A long time ago, before life had led her to the convent, she had played for hours every day. Music had filled her world then. She had played in school events, small community gatherings, and even been encouraged by her teacher to pursue the piano seriously. But life had changed, and responsibilities had grown. Her dreams slowly faded into the background as she cared for others. Eventually, the piano became a memory she locked away quietly. Still, whenever she walked past the hall and saw the piano sitting silently in the corner, something warm stirred in her chest. Sometimes she paused and touched the edge of it gently with her fingertips, the way someone might touch an old photograph. She wondered if her hands still remembered the keys. She wondered if the music still lived inside her somewhere. One afternoon, as the convent prepared for a community event, the younger sisters gathered in the hall. They were planning a small music night where local residents, families, and visitors would come to enjoy songs and performances. A few of the sisters were practicing a simple choir piece, their voices rising and falling gently. Others discussed decorations, seating arrangements, and a short welcome speech. The elderly nun stood quietly near the doorway, watching them with a small smile. She loved seeing the younger sisters so excited. Their energy filled the room like sunlight. As she listened to them talk about the music for the event, her heart began to beat a little faster. She took a slow breath and stepped forward. She didn't like interrupting anyone, but something inside her pushed her gently toward the group. "May I?" She began softly. "May I play a small piece for the event?" Just something simple. The room grew quiet for a moment. The younger sisters turned toward her, surprised by the request. They had never seen her play the piano, never even seen her sit at it. To them, she was the gentle elder who baked bread on weekends, folded laundry by the window, and gave comforting words when someone felt troubled. One of the sisters gave her an awkward smile. "Oh, are you sure you want to play? The evening might be a bit long already. And the piano, well, it's quite a responsibility. We wouldn't want you to feel stressed." Another added kindly, "Maybe you could help us with the decorations instead? You're very good at arranging things." Their voices were gentle, not unkind, but their eyes held doubt. The elderly nun felt the warmth inside her chest dim slightly. She lowered her hands and nodded. "Of course," she said softly. "I understand." She stepped back, pretending she didn't feel the sting of disappointment. She did not want to burden anyone. She told herself that they were busy, that it didn't matter. But deep inside, a small part of her felt like a candle being blown out. The younger sisters continued planning, talking excitedly about the performances and preparations. The elderly nun returned to her usual tasks. She set plates on tables, checked the water jugs, adjusted curtains, and smiled politely whenever someone thanked her. But inside, she carried a quiet sadness that she did not show. That night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, the convent hall was dark, except for the faint moonlight slipping through the windows. The elderly nun walked past the hall on her way to the chapel, but something made her stop. She turned slowly and looked at the piano sitting alone in the corner. She stood there for a long moment, listening to the stillness around her. Then she stepped forward. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the piano cover. The keys looked just as she remembered, smooth, inviting, familiar. She sat down gently on the wooden bench. It creaked a little under her weight, as if greeting an old friend. She placed her fingers on the keys, but did not press them yet. The hall was quiet. The world outside was silent. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. She tried to remember the songs she used to play, the ones that had once filled her days with joy. Then, without thinking too much, she pressed the first note. It rang softly through the hall. She pressed another, then another. Her fingers moved slowly at first, unsure, searching. But then something familiar surfaced. Her hands began to find their rhythm again, as if they had only been sleeping all these years. A melody rose into the air, gentle and warm. It wrapped around her like an embrace. Her shoulders relaxed as she let the music guide her. She played a tune from her childhood, one she had practiced countless times in her tiny room long ago. Her eyes grew moist, but not from sadness. It was from something else, a feeling of rediscovery, of reconnecting with a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. She did not know how long she played. Time felt soft, like it had stopped for her. She played softly, tenderly, the notes swimming across the hall like whispering winds. She thought she was alone, but she wasn't, unbeknownst to her. A volunteer who had been helping with the event decorations had returned to the hall to pick up a forgotten bag. As he stepped into the doorway, he froze. His eyes widened as he listened. He had never heard the elderly nun speak loudly, let alone play an instrument. The sound coming from the piano didn't feel like something from this quiet place. It felt rich, emotional, alive. He slowly took out his phone, unsure whether to interrupt or simply watch. Something about the moment felt sacred, but something else told him it should be shared. Not for attention, but because the world needed to see it. He pressed record. The elderly nun continued playing, unaware of his presence, unaware that her forgotten gift was now being captured. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, each note carrying a piece of her life, her memories, her quiet strength. When she finally stopped, she stayed still for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She didn't turn around. She didn't know anyone had been watching. She simply lowered the piano cover gently and stood up. As she left the hall. She did not know that her life was about to change. She did not know that the simple song she played in the quiet of the night would soon echo far beyond the walls of the convent. All she knew was that, for the first time in many years, she felt alive again, as if music had opened a door inside her that had been locked for too long. What happened after that night would not only surprise her, but surprise the whole world. The morning after the elderly nun played the piano in the quiet hall, she woke before the sun, as she always did. She moved slowly through her small room, lit her candle, and whispered a short prayer. Her hands felt warm, almost as if the music from the previous night still lived in her fingertips. she didn't know that somewhere in the building, a video of her late-night performance was sitting in the phone of the volunteer who had witnessed everything. She didn't know he had spent most of the night debating whether he should show anyone. He wasn't sure how she would feel. He respected her deeply, and the last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable. But he also felt something stronger, a belief that what he had seen was not something to be hidden. The world outside the convent often felt loud and heavy, filled with problems and worries. Yet the music she played had brought him peace in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He believed others might feel the same. Still, he told himself he would decide later. For now, he tucked the phone into his pocket and went about his morning tasks. The elderly nun finished her prayers and headed to the kitchen. The younger sisters were already busy. Some were chopping vegetables, others boiling water for tea, and a few arranging trays for visitors who were expected later that day. The convent was livelier than usual because preparations for the upcoming community event were getting serious. She offered to help, and they handed her a basket of bread to slice. She smiled and began cutting each piece with steady hands. Nobody noticed the slight glow on her face or the calm happiness in her eyes. No one suspected that something had changed inside her after last night. While she worked, the volunteer walked into the kitchen looking for one of the younger sisters. He greeted everyone politely, but his eyes kept drifting toward the elderly nun. He wondered if he should tell her what he had seen, or if he should keep the video a secret a little longer. Before he could approach her, he was called to the hall to help with chairs. He left the kitchen quickly, but his mind stayed troubled. The video on his phone felt like a small candle burning in his pocket. Later in the morning, the younger sisters gathered again to practice their choir performance. The elderly nun finished her kitchen tasks and quietly walked to the hallway outside the chapel. She sat on a bench near the window and listened. She enjoyed their singing. The notes were simple and sweet, but something about them made her think of the piano again. A soft memory rose in her mind, a memory of her younger self sitting at a piano in a room filled with sunlight, her hands flying over the keys, her teacher watching proudly. It felt like another lifetime. She closed her eyes and tried to push the memory away. She reminded herself that she had already lived that part of her life. Now her role was to support others, not to stand in front of people. The younger sisters had dreams to follow, and she was happy simply helping them. But even as she told herself this, her heart felt heavy. She wished she hadn't asked to play for the event. She wished she had kept her love for the piano hidden. Maybe then she wouldn't have felt the sting of being turned away. She tried to brush the feeling aside, but it lingered quietly like a small shadow. Around lunchtime, the volunteer finally gathered enough courage to approach one of the younger sisters. He took her aside and whispered, "I need to show you something." They stepped into a quiet corner near the library. He unlocked his phone and played the video. The sister watched silently. Her eyes widened as she listened to the gentle, emotional notes filling the small space between them. She covered her mouth slowly, realizing who was playing. "That's her," she whispered. "I didn't know she could. I never imagined she." The volunteer nodded. "I didn't either. I walked in accidentally last night. She was alone. I didn't want to disturb her." For a moment, they both stood still, listening to the last notes fade. The sister felt something inside her shift. She had always admired the elderly nun, but she had never looked beyond the surface, beyond the gentle smile and quiet footsteps. She felt a small wave of guilt wash over her. They had dismissed her without truly knowing her. They had assumed her age meant she couldn't contribute to the event in the way she desired. The volunteer looked nervous. "Do you think we should show this to the others?" "I don't want to upset her." The sister thought for a moment. "I think we should. Not to embarrass her, but because she deserves to be seen. We didn't give her a chance. Maybe this will help everyone understand. She asked the volunteer to wait while she gathered the other sisters. Within minutes, they were in a small group, huddled together in the corner as the video played again. One by one, their faces changed from curiosity to shock to quiet awe. No. One spoke for several seconds after the video ended. Finally, one of them whispered, "How could we have told her no?" Another put a hand on her chest. "She plays with so much heart. I've never heard anything like that in this hall." The youngest of them shook her head. "We should ask her again. She should perform. She deserves to." But another sister hesitated. "What if she feels uncomfortable that we filmed her? Maybe she wanted it to remain private." The group fell silent again. It was true, they had to be careful. They didn't want to hurt her. They didn't want to treat her any differently than before. They needed to approach the situation gently. Before they could decide what to do next, the volunteer spoke quietly. I think the world would love this. People need to see something pure like this." The sisters exchanged uncertain glances. "Maybe," one said softly. "But we should talk to her first, before anything like that." They all nodded. Hours passed, and the video stayed only among them for the moment. They waited for the right time to speak to the elderly nun, but she remained busy helping others. She moved from task to task with her usual quiet grace, unaware of the whispers that followed her, unaware that behind closed doors, people were talking about her with wide eyes and softened hearts. Later in the afternoon, the volunteer sat alone in the garden, scrolling through his phone. He rewatched the video again, unable to shake the feeling that it held something rare. The music was simple, not complex or flashy, but it carried a depth that could only come from someone who had lived a long life, someone who had carried joy and sorrow in equal measure. He placed his phone down on the bench and closed his eyes. He could still hear the melody in his mind, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt he had been given a responsibility. As the sun began to lower, painting soft colors across the sky, he made a quiet decision. The younger sisters were busy with preparations. The elderly nun had gone to the chapel to light the evening candles. No one was watching him. He unlocked his phone again. He hesitated for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. He thought about the nun's warm smile, her gentle hands, her humble nature. He knew she would never seek attention. She would never try to stand in the spotlight. But he also knew this. The world was full of noise, full of stress, full of sadness. People struggled every day to find moments of peace. And her music brought peace. He uploaded the video. He did not add dramatic words or emotional sentences. He simply wrote, "A beautiful moment I was lucky to witness. An elderly nun playing the piano alone last night." Then he closed the app and took a deep breath. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't expect much. He didn't think the video would spread beyond a handful of people. He stood up, brushed off his clothes, and walked back toward the convent hall. Inside the chapel, the elderly nun gently lit each candle, one by one. The warm glow slowly filled the room, and she smiled softly at the flickering lights. She had no idea that at that very moment, her music was beginning to travel far beyond the quiet walls of the convent. She didn't know that strangers on the internet were already stopping their scrolling, pausing with surprise at the gentle melody. She didn't know that her life, quiet, ordinary, and hidden from the world, was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. Because sometimes the world recognizes beauty the moment it appears. And sometimes a single quiet video is enough to touch thousands of hearts. The morning sun slowly crept through the thin curtains of the elderly nun's small room. She awoke as usual, the soft light brushing against her face, and reached to light her candle. The ritual was comforting, steady, a way to begin each day with peace. She whispered her morning prayers, feeling the familiar calm that came with speaking words she had repeated for decades. Outside, the world was already moving faster than she could imagine. Unseen by her, the video of her playing the piano had begun to travel far beyond the convent. People were watching it quietly at first, sharing it with friends and family, but soon it began to gather attention on a wider scale. The soft, tender melody carried a warmth that few could resist. It was simple, yet powerful, echoing a story of quiet strength and hidden talent. Inside the convent, life continued as it always had. The sisters bustled around, preparing for the day's work. Some tended to the garden, others sorted supplies, and a few checked lists for the upcoming event. The elderly nun moved among them with her usual grace, helping wherever she was needed. Unaware of the growing attention outside, the volunteer who had recorded the video had returned early to check on reactions. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages from strangers expressing amazement. Many wrote that they had watched the video more than once, that it made them smile, that it reminded them of their own forgotten dreams or talents. He couldn't believe how quickly it had spread. People he didn't even know were reaching out, asking where the video was filmed, wanting to know the pianist. He felt a mix of excitement and worry. He knew the elderly nun would never want the attention. She played not for recognition, not for fame, but because music had always been part of her soul. He wondered how they could tell her gently, without overwhelming her. By mid-morning, the head sister of the convent had heard whispers from the younger sisters. They spoke quietly, trying not to disturb the elderly nun as she arranged flowers near the chapel. "Have you seen this?" one of them asked, showing her the video on a small tablet. The head sister watched silently, her eyes widening as she listened. She had known the elderly nun for years, but she had never seen this side of her. The music filled the room, carrying a deep emotion that spoke louder than words ever could. She plays beautifully," whispered the youngest sister. "Yes," said another. "All these years, and we never knew." The head sister nodded slowly, feeling a small pang of regret. They had all underestimated the elderly nun. They had seen her age, her gentle demeanor, and assumed she could not contribute to the event in a meaningful way. Yet now, listening to her play, it was clear how wrong they had been. Meanwhile, the elderly nun went about her tasks, arranging candles and wiping the dust from shelves. She hummed a soft tune, almost instinctively, as she worked. Music had returned to her life quietly, and she was not yet aware that it had touched so many others. Late in the morning, the volunteer gathered courage again. He approached the elderly nun in the hall, holding his phone carefully. She looked up and smiled at him gently. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning, sister," he replied, his voice a little nervous. I wanted to show you something." She tilted her head slightly, curious but not alarmed. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. He handed her the phone. "It's a video of you playing last night." She took the device carefully, her hands steady, but her heart starting to beat a little faster. As she watched herself, sitting at the piano in the quiet hall, playing with such emotion, she felt a mix of embarrassment and wonder. She had not intended anyone to see that moment. It had been private, personal, a connection between her and the music. But as the video played, she also felt something else. She saw the joy in her own face, the peace that had returned when her fingers touched the keys. She heard the notes as she had played them, soft and warm, and for a moment she forgot about everything else. She forgot about age, about doubt, about the quiet life she had accepted. She simply listened. When the video ended, she looked up slowly. The volunteer and the younger sisters were watching her, their eyes wide, waiting for her reaction. I didn't know it sounded like that," she whispered, her voice almost trembling. She placed the phone down carefully, as if it were a fragile treasure. "It was just a simple piece. Nothing special." One of the sisters shook her head. "It's not just special, it's extraordinary. Sister, you have a gift that we never truly understood." Another added softly, "We should let people hear it. More people should hear it." The elderly nun looked at them, unsure. I don't play for attention," she said. "I play for peace, for myself." The volunteer nodded. "I know. That's why it felt so pure. But people, they need something beautiful. And you have something beautiful inside you." She looked down, her fingers folding nervously. She had never imagined herself in this position, never imagined strangers across the world seeing her play. It felt overwhelming, almost impossible. The head sister spoke gently. "We can take it slowly. No one is asking you to perform in front of hundreds of people right away. But we should acknowledge this gift, and maybe, just maybe, you should play at the community event. You deserve that chance." The elderly nun felt a wave of fear and hesitation. She had been turned away once before, and though it had hurt, she had accepted it quietly. Now, being asked again, she didn't know if she had the courage. But she also felt something stirring inside her, a quiet, persistent hope. A small voice that whispered, maybe it was time. She nodded slowly. "Perhaps. We can try. But only a short piece. Something simple." The sisters smiled, relief and joy mingling in their expressions. They had not expected her to agree so quickly, and they were careful not to overwhelm her with excitement. They spent the rest of the day helping her prepare a small piece for the event, choosing a simple yet emotional melody that she could play comfortably. Meanwhile, the video continued to spread online. By the afternoon, thousands of people had watched it. Comments flooded in. Some expressed admiration, some shared personal stories of forgotten dreams, and some simply said that watching the elderly nun play had brought them peace during a stressful day. The volunteer read some of the comments quietly, amazed at how many people were touched by something so gentle and simple. He realized that her music had already begun to change lives, even before she knew it. The thought made his heart swell with quiet happiness. As evening approached, the convent prepared for the visitors who were coming to see the upcoming event set up. The elderly nun practiced in the hall quietly, her hands moving gently across the keys. She played slowly, carefully, listening to each note, feeling the melody travel through the space around her. She was not performing yet. She was preparing, reconnecting with the music that had been a part of her soul for so many years. And in doing so, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in decades. The younger sisters and the volunteer watched from a distance, careful not to disturb her. They marveled at her focus, at the way her fingers moved so gracefully, even after years of not playing. It was clear that the music was not just skill, but a part of her very being. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the convent garden, the elderly nun played one final chord and rested her hands. She breathed deeply, a soft smile on her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt the world watching her, and yet she was not afraid. She felt a quiet strength, a quiet courage, and an unexpected excitement for what was to come. Little did she know that the world outside the convent walls was already waiting, watching and ready to be stunned by the simple, heartfelt music of an elderly nun who had been underestimated for far too long. The day after the elderly nun's quiet practice in the hall, the convent felt different. There was a soft energy in the air, a quiet excitement that no one could quite explain. Some of the younger sisters whispered about the video that had circulated online, their voices full of awe. They could hardly believe that someone across the world was already seeing the elderly nun in a way they never had. The nun herself awoke as usual, rising before dawn. She lit her candle and whispered her prayers, the routine comforting her. She felt calm, yet something inside her hummed with anticipation. She did not yet know the extent of the attention her music had received, but she could sense that something had shifted. The energy in the convent seemed different, as if the walls themselves carried the echoes of the music she had played. As she moved about the morning tasks, tidying rooms and helping in the kitchen, she noticed small glances from the younger sisters. They smiled, sometimes whispered, and quickly looked away. It was clear they wanted to tell her something, but were unsure how to approach it. Meanwhile, the volunteer who had recorded the video was overwhelmed by the response it had received online. People were sharing it rapidly, posting it to various groups and platforms. The video had already reached thousands, and the comments were flowing faster than he could read. Some people shared stories of their own hidden talents. Some spoke about how the music brought them comfort, and many simply expressed their admiration. By mid-morning, news reporters began contacting the convent. They had discovered the video and were eager to know more about the nun who had captivated the world with such a simple, heartfelt performance. Emails, phone calls, and messages flooded in. The sisters gathered quietly in the office, unsure how to respond. They had never dealt with this kind of attention before. The elderly nun remained unaware, quietly helping in the background, arranging tables and folding linens. The head sister called a small meeting to decide how to handle the situation. They wanted to respect the elderly nun's privacy, but they also realized that people genuinely wanted to hear her story. They agreed to wait until she was informed personally before responding to anyone. When the volunteer approached her with the news, she listened quietly. He explained how the video had spread, how people were moved by her music, and how reporters were trying to reach out. At first, she was shocked. Her eyes widened as she realized the scale of what was happening. I didn't play for anyone to see," she said softly, her hands twisting nervously. I just wanted to play." The volunteer nodded. "I know. That's what made it so beautiful. People are touched because it's real. They're not expecting anything, and that's why they love it." She looked down, unsure of what to feel. The idea of being in the spotlight was foreign to her. She had spent decades living quietly, serving others, and avoiding attention. Yet, beneath her hesitation, there was a small spark of curiosity and perhaps even excitement. A part of her wanted to see what the world thought, even if she was nervous. The sisters encouraged her gently. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," the head sister said. "But if you choose to share your music, it could bring joy to many people. And it doesn't have to be large or flashy. Just you, playing as you always do." The elderly nun nodded slowly. She felt a mix of fear and hope. She had never imagined herself as someone whose music could reach so many. She had always played for herself, for quiet moments of peace. But now, she realized that the music could mean something more. It could touch lives in ways she had never thought possible. By afternoon, the convent began receiving visitors. Some were neighbors, curious about the story. Others were journalists and volunteers who wanted to hear the music and perhaps record it properly. The elderly nun was nervous. She tried to remain calm, but her hands felt heavy, her heart racing. This was unfamiliar territory, and she was unsure how to navigate it. She was escorted gently to the hall where she had played the night before. The piano sat waiting, polished and ready, bathed in soft light. Her fingers trembled slightly as she approached it. She took a deep breath and sat on the bench, feeling the smooth wood under her hands. A small group gathered quietly, giving her space. She played softly at first, testing the keys, listening to the notes as they filled the room. Gradually, she grew more confident. Her fingers moved gracefully, recalling the melodies of her youth. The music rose gently, filling the space with warmth and emotion. As she played, she noticed the visitors watching with awe. Their eyes were wide, their expressions soft, touched by the sincerity and beauty of her performance. Some whispered quietly to each other, unable to contain their admiration. It was unlike anything they had expected, a simple, heartfelt performance that spoke directly to the heart. The elderly nun played several pieces, each one chosen carefully, each one conveying a quiet emotion. She felt the music flowing through her, as natural as breathing. She was not performing for recognition or fame. She was simply sharing a part of herself that had been hidden for decades. After she finished, there was a moment of silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if absorbing the last notes that lingered in the air. Then, softly, the visitors began to clap. It started quietly, but grew steadily. The elderly nun looked up, startled by the attention, but also touched. She had never imagined that her music could have such an effect. A journalist stepped forward carefully, holding a notebook. "Sister," he said gently, "your music has reached thousands online. People are deeply moved by it. Can you tell us how you feel? What inspired you to play?" The elderly nun paused, thinking carefully. She had not considered words for this moment. She had always expressed herself through music, not speech. Finally, she spoke softly. "I play because music is part of me. It is not for anyone else, but it seems that it touches others. I am humbled and grateful that it does." The journalist nodded, understanding her humility. He stepped back, letting her have the space she needed. Others took notes or quietly whispered questions, but she remained calm, letting the music speak for itself. Evening, the story of the elderly nun had spread far and wide. News outlets posted articles about her, and social media was alive with clips of her performance. People across the world shared their thoughts and feelings, moved by the unexpected talent of someone who had been quietly living her life in a small convent. The elderly nun returned to her room that night, exhausted but filled with a deep sense of peace. She lit her candle, whispered her prayers, and reflected on the day. She had been nervous, unsure, and a little afraid. Yet she had faced the moment with courage, and in doing so, she had shared a gift that could not be measured. She thought about the people who had watched her play, those who had felt joy or calm from the simple melodies she had played. She thought about the volunteer who had recorded the video, the sisters who had supported her, and the strangers whose lives had been touched by her music. A quiet smile appeared on her face. For the first time in many years, she felt seen, not for what she had done for others, not for her quiet service, but for who she truly was, for the music that had always lived within her. The world outside was wide, fast, and loud. Yet in her quiet convent, she had found a way to reach it, one note at a time. And as she closed her eyes, she realized that she was no longer just playing for herself. She was playing for everyone who needed to hear something gentle, something real, something that reminded them of the beauty that exists in small, quiet moments. The morning after her music reached so many people, the elderly nun woke up with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She lit her candle, whispered her prayers, and prepared for the day. She knew that today would be different. The community event was approaching, and she had been invited to play in front of everyone. Though the thought made her anxious, a quiet determination had begun to grow inside her. The younger sisters moved around the convent, preparing decorations, arranging chairs, and ensuring everything was ready. They exchanged smiles whenever they glanced at her, their expressions filled with encouragement. For the first time in her life, she felt a strong sense of support from those around her, as though they believed in her talent just as much as she did herself. When she arrived at the hall, she saw the piano waiting for her, polished and gleaming under the soft lights. Her fingers trembled slightly as she approached it, but she took a deep breath and sat down. The hall was quiet at first, but slowly visitors began to fill the room. Families, neighbors, and a few journalists had gathered, their eyes curious and respectful. The volunteer who had recorded the video gave her a reassuring nod from the side of the hall. She smiled softly in return, grateful for his quiet support. It reminded her that she was not alone, and that thought gave her courage. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her fingertips. The first note she played rang softly through the hall, capturing everyone's attention. She played slowly at first, letting the melody flow naturally, feeling it rise and fall as it always had. With every note, her confidence grew. The audience was silent, listening intently to the music that seemed to come straight from her heart. Now the pieces she had chosen were simple but full of emotion. They told a story without words, a story of patience, resilience, and quiet strength. Some of the visitors closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched in awe as her fingers danced over the keys with grace and precision. As she played, she felt a strange mix of nostalgia and joy. Memories of her youth came flooding back, times when she had practiced for hours, times when music had been the center of her world. Those memories were sweet, yet tinged with longing. But now she was here, sharing her gift with others, and it felt right, as though she had found her place again. The hall was filled with a gentle hush, broken only by the sound of the piano and the occasional soft intake of breath from the audience. Every note seemed to touch something deep within them. Some felt tears welling in their eyes, others felt a smile spreading across their face. The music had a way of connecting people without words, speaking directly to their hearts. When she finished the first piece, the audience remained silent for a moment, as if savoring the last lingering note. Then a soft clap began, followed by more and more. The sound grew steadily until the entire hall was applauding, some standing, some wiping tears from their eyes. She looked up, startled by the response, but also deeply moved. The warmth and appreciation in the room filled her with a quiet happiness she had never known. After a brief pause, she continued to play, choosing a second piece that was slightly faster, but still gentle and emotional. The audience followed along, captivated by the way she conveyed so much feeling with her music. Her fingers moved with a precision and grace that belied her age. She played not to impress, not to show off, but simply to share a part of herself that had been waiting for this moment for years. During the performance, she noticed small gestures from the audience, children leaning forward in their seats, elders closing their eyes and smiling, some quietly mouthing words to the melody as if it were a conversation. She realized that music had a power far greater than she had ever imagined. It could reach beyond words, beyond age, beyond circumstance, connecting people in ways she had never thought possible. As she played the final piece, a soft, lingering melody that had always been her favorite, she felt a sense of completion. The music had traveled through the hall, touching every person present, and she felt an unspoken connection with each of them. Her heart swelled with gratitude and a sense of peace. For years, she had played in quiet rooms, alone with her thoughts. Now, she had shared her music with a world ready to listen, and the feeling was beyond anything she had expected. When the last note faded, the hall remained silent for a heartbeat before erupting into applause. This time, it was louder, more enthusiastic, filled with genuine admiration and emotion. The elderly nun looked up, feeling tears prick her eyes. She had never been celebrated like this before. She had never imagined that her quiet life, her simple love for music, could bring such joy to others. Visitors began to approach her, speaking softly, expressing their gratitude, sharing how much her music had touched them. Some brought flowers, some simply smiled, and others quietly held her hands in appreciation. She received each gesture with humility, her heart full but her demeanor calm, as though she had known this moment would come all along. A few journalists gently asked for a brief interview. She spoke softly, explaining that music had always been a part of her life, and that playing had never been about recognition, but about sharing something pure and heartfelt. Her words were simple, yet they resonated with everyone present, adding to the impact of her performance. By the end of the day, the elderly nun had not only played beautifully, but had also inspired those around her. The community event had begun as a simple gathering, but her performance had turned it into something extraordinary. People spoke of her talent long after she left the stage, sharing stories of how her music had made them reflect, feel, and hope. As the hall emptied and the convent returned to its quiet rhythm, she sat for a moment alone at the piano. Her hands rested on the keys, and she smiled softly. She had faced her fears, stepped into the light, and shared a gift that had been waiting for this very moment. The applause, the admiration, the emotions of the audience, all of it was overwhelming, yet humbling. She realized that her life, quiet as it had been, had led to this moment where her music could touch so many hearts. When she returned to her small room, she lit her candle and whispered her evening prayers. She reflected on the day, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only played the piano, but had also discovered that courage and faith could open doors she had long thought closed. Her music, once confined to quiet practice in the hall, had now traveled far beyond, leaving an impact she could not fully measure. The world had begun to notice her. But more importantly, she had begun to notice herself in a new light. The elderly nun realized that it was never too late to share one's gifts, never too late to step forward, and never too late to inspire others. She had been given a chance to play, to touch lives, and to remind people that passion and dedication could flourish at any age. That night, as the convent settled into silence, she felt a quiet peace unlike any she had known. She had played, she had shared, and she had been seen. The simple act of playing the piano had transformed not only the community around her, but also her own sense of self. And as she closed her eyes and allowed herself to rest, she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey she had longed for but never dared to take until now. The days after the elderly nun's performance at the community event were filled with quiet excitement. The convent had returned to its usual routine, yet everything felt changed. Visitors continued to come, some simply to listen to her music, others to learn her story. News of her talent had spread far and wide, and the world outside the convent seemed eager to hear her play again. She awoke each morning as she always had, lighting her candle and offering her prayers. The rituals remained unchanged, grounding her in a sense of calm. But now there was a new energy within her, a sense of purpose, a quiet awareness that her music could touch lives in ways she had never imagined. The younger sisters continued their daily tasks, but they often stole glances toward her, smiles on their faces. They had witnessed the impact of her performance and felt proud and inspired. They had once underestimated her, but now they realized the depth of her talent, the strength of her spirit, and the beauty of her humility. A few days later, the convent arranged for a small series of charity performances. The elderly nun was hesitant at first. She did not seek recognition or applause. Her music was personal, a private expression of her soul. Yet she understood the opportunity to bring comfort, joy, and hope to others. With gentle encouragement from the sisters, she agreed. The first performance was in a nearby hall, filled with people who had heard of her music and traveled to see her play. She entered quietly, her hands brushing over the piano keys before sitting down. The audience watched in silence, some with tears in their eyes. As the elderly nun began to play, her fingers moved with precision and grace, the melodies gentle and evocative. She played songs that told stories of hope, resilience, and quiet joy. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her life, every pause a reflection of the years she had spent in the convent, the lessons she had learned, and the love she had shared. The audience was captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others watched in awe as her hands moved gracefully across the keys. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress. She played with honesty, with emotion, with the simplicity that made her music so profound. After each performance, visitors would quietly approach her, sharing their feelings, expressing gratitude, and sometimes sharing their own stories of forgotten dreams or hidden talents. She listened to each one with a gentle smile. Her heart touched by the impact of her music, she began to receive letters and messages from people far away. Some described how her music had helped them through difficult times. Others spoke of inspiration, courage, and hope. She read each message quietly, often with tears in her eyes, realizing that something as simple as playing the piano could create a ripple effect that reached thousands of hearts. The elderly nun also started to meet with children in the community. Many of them had never touched a piano or seen someone play with such dedication and emotion. She would sit with them, gently guiding their fingers, encouraging them to find their own melodies, their own ways to express themselves. She emphasized patience, practice, and most importantly, joy. Through these moments, she discovered a new purpose. Her music was no longer just a personal expression. It was a tool to uplift, to teach, and to inspire. She realized that even a simple act, like sharing a melody, could leave a lasting impression on people's lives. As weeks passed, the elderly nun's story spread further. Invitations came from small towns, community centers, and local schools. She traveled quietly, often accompanied by one or two sisters, playing at intimate gatherings where her music could be felt and appreciated. Each performance was modest, never loud or showy, yet each left a deep impression on those who attended. Back at the convent, life continued its steady rhythm. The sisters worked, prayed, and tended to their daily duties, but there was a renewed sense of excitement. They had witnessed firsthand the power of sharing hidden talents, the importance of encouragement, and the impact one person's courage could have on others. Despite the growing recognition, the elderly nun remained humble. She did not seek fame or accolades. Each day, she returned to the convent with the same quiet routine, tending to tasks, lighting candles, and offering prayers. Yet her heart carried the knowledge that her music had reached far beyond the walls of the convent, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. Over time, her story inspired many. Adults and children alike began to explore forgotten dreams, to take small steps toward passions they had abandoned or ignored. Letters arrived from people expressing gratitude, describing how her music had encouraged them to pick up an instrument, to pursue art, or simply to believe in themselves. The elderly nun's influence extended beyond the music itself. People admired her patience, humility, and the quiet determination that had allowed her to share her gift despite initial setbacks. She had been underestimated because of her age and her gentle demeanor. Yet she had proven that talent, courage, and passion could thrive at any stage of life. One evening, after returning from a small performance in a nearby town, she sat alone at the piano in the convent hall. The room was empty and quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. She played a simple melody, letting each note resonate through the hall. The music was for herself, a reflection of her journey, her gratitude, and the lives she had touched. As the last note lingered, she closed her eyes and smiled softly. She had faced fear, embraced opportunity, and shared a part of herself that had remained hidden for too long. In doing so, she had created a legacy of hope, inspiration, and a quiet reminder that it is never too late to pursue a passion. The world beyond the convent continued to recognize her talent. But for the elderly nun, the true reward was in the connections she had formed, the lives she had influenced, and the joy of sharing her music. Each note she played carried more than sound. It carried love, patience, courage, and the gentle proof that even the quietest people can make a profound difference. And so, in the quiet convent, the elderly nun continued to play, teach, and inspire. Her music became a symbol, not of fame or recognition, but of the enduring power of passion, humility, and the courage to share one's gifts. Through her piano, she reminded the world that age cannot dim talent, that kindness and dedication matter, and that sometimes the simplest actions can have the most extraordinary impact.